quick video here on the new Tassadar. I think at level 7, if you are going Psionic Echo, there's a really tricky timing window here that you just need to be aware of. So the optimal way to do this basically is you cast your W, and then it gets the damage ramping up if they're standing in it the whole time. I'm just going to assume they are for the purpose of this dummy or whatever. And then you would spawn a second W with the Q, and then basically this talent would double the damage of your W every time the cooldowns are up, because you're getting 2 Ws during the same time or whatever. But in reality, it should be more than double, because the second storm will have the damage ramped up already, whereas the first one, has to ramp up the damage from 0. So in reality, this talent should basically more than double the damage that your W is doing. But because they can only take damage from one storm at a time, is that you have to space them out. So because the first storm lasts 3 seconds and this buff lasts 3 seconds, is you basically have to time it so that right as the previous storm is ending, you hit them with the second storm. But that timing window is really, really, really tight. And so there's basically 3 possible things that can happen. So first, I'll just show the damage of the storm here is 749.8, so basically 750. And then the damage of just the Q itself is 614. And so if I do a W and then follow it up with a Q, I'm gonna want to, you'll see this red line that outlines the Q when I have the buff, and it'll slowly go around the hexagon, and I'll probably try and time it around the second whatever vertical bar here, or it's like the last 2/3 or last 1/3 of the cooldown or whatever. And so do this, you'll see right as that one's ending, I'm going to hit with the second one, and you can see, so these do have the 167 there. It's hard to see, but this should do, I think, 2,300 roughly damage. If we let that go all the way through, yep, 2,363. And so if I pull up a calculator thing real quick, you do 2363 minus 614. And so that's the damage of just the 2 storms together. And we know the first one did 749 damage, so the second storm did 1,000 damage, right? So I'm more than doubling the damage of the storm if I do that. But the problem is so that's one case. That's the optimal case. You get basically an extra 250 damage by timing this perfectly. And right now you can see I also don't have the level 16 W pick talent to make this just easier to demonstrate for right now. So you can see, here's one situation that can happen, is now I've started the second storm, and I've overlapped them slightly. So the second storm overlapped with the first storm, you can only take damage from one at a time, so I'm going to miss out on probably 167 damage here, so this should end up being 2,100 something. Oh, didn't quite do that exactly perfectly, but we'll try again here in a second. Just fire this slightly sooner. And so there, you get that happening. So if you do it slightly too early, you get the same thing, but you miss out on 167 damage, right? So you get a benefit possibly of up to around 250 damage, but if you do it too early, you can lose 167. The other option that can happen is if I'm just very, very, very slightly too late. That's going to be too early again. I'll just toggle cooldowns. Is if I'm just very slightly too late on timing these in between the others, you can see that first tick did 83. So even though there was very small gap between the 2 storms, I didn't reset the damage taken on this thing. Even though there's a very, very, very slight gap, you would think that that damage should continue over. That was maybe less than half a second between the storms. But you end up missing out on even more damage if you're slightly late to casting the ability. So I think my feedback is just, this is currently just a very tight timing window. It seems to be about a quarter, half a second, somewhere in there. And if you miss that timing window, the second storm doesn't get the damage bonus, even though it seems like it basically should get the same damage bonus, because they were just being damaged by the storm very, very recently. It seems like that damage buff falls off too quick. That was almost instant as to when the next hit would have happened from the previous storm if it had been continuing longer. But you can see there, you miss out on the damage. So basically, you always want to go early, and the timing window is really short. If you space these out as you're properly supposed to do, if you space it out just barely too long, and the spacing is just barely too big, you miss out on actually more damage than if you were early. I think this is currently too restrictive and frustrating, and like it doesn't seem like it should work this way. This buff should last like 1 second or 2 seconds, and just so that it's reliable that you'll get the second storm with the damage buff. That's like how you're supposed to use these abilities if you're using it intentionally. So the problem is if you're encouraged to go early and you're going W talents, like obviously this is one of the builds that is very likely for you to go, is that if you take the level 16 where it damages faster, is that these ticks are happening faster. So instead of going early and you only lose 1 tick for 167 damage, I can actually lose 2 ticks. And it's 167 times 2, which is 334 damage. And I'm only getting the possible benefit of 250 damage. So you're encouraging me to go early most of the game. The timing window is really, really, really tight, really narrow, seems overly punishing to the player for doing like how the ability is supposed to work and function and be played and used optimally. Really, really punishing if you miss that window like just barely perfectly. And if you do what you're supposed to do for the first half of the game, or the first like 2/3 of the game, by going early, you actually end up losing more damage because you're ending up missing 2 ticks, which are 334 damage, than the benefit would give you even if you timed it perfectly and got the benefit of 250 damage. So yeah, I think currently my feedback is just make this buff last like 1 second, 1 full second. I think 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds. I think that those would all be pretty reasonable, and that should make this a much more reliable ability to use and much higher quality of life for the players using the ability how they're optimally supposed to be using the ability. Right now, it's just really punishing for using it how you're supposed to, especially because Q has a travel time and people are going to be moving and things like that. It's a little bit easier if you have the slow, for example, or you have a force wall where maybe they're not moving, but they're still going to be some distance away from you. You want to play really far back, so the delay on hitting your Q is really long, so you have to like preemptively cast it like 2/3 of the way through the first storm to time it correctly. So yeah, it's really rough. Not really a fan, personally, of that being so restrictive and punishing.